Okay, one of the things we need to think about in terms of studying Nietzsche and getting ready for our exam on Nietzsche is his view on the scope of philosophy. So we need to unpick that phrase a little bit and understand what that means to start off with. So the word scope means what can philosophy actually achieve and what should it try to achieve. And one of the main points, maybe really the most important point that Nietzsche's making in the whole of his thought, is that the history of philosophy up to that point has got this question wrong. It's misunderstood what the real true scope of philosophy should be. And his main point is that philosophers, stretching back from ancient Greece, which he was really obsessed with, he knew a lot about ancient Greek thought and ancient Greek philosophy, stretching from ancient Greek philosophy to his own modern day 19th century Germany, philosophy had been obsessed with just trying to find out about the truth. That was the only goal for philosophy, was to know what is the truth about any particular matter that it was dealing with. What Nietzsche did, which was completely new, completely radical, was to say that actually whenever philosophers have said what I'm doing in being a philosopher is seeking the truth, they were fooling themselves, they were completely kidding themselves. And his point is that you can never actually do that as a philosopher. So why does he think that? Why does he think you can't just sit in a room and try and come to a pure understanding of what the truth is about any given issue, whether that is what is morally the right thing to do, whether that is what's the relationship between the way I perceive the world and the way the world really is? Why is it that we can't try and answer those questions and get to a pure truth on them? Nietzsche's point of view is that whenever a philosopher does try and answer those questions, they will always inevitably end up expressing their own preformed prejudices, and that when they complete their philosophical system, what they'll actually have written is a history of their own prejudice, their own particular point of view, rather than some kind of objective, abstract truth. And one way of trying to understand what his point is to look at a couple of examples. Let's take the example of René Descartes. Descartes certainly claims that he was trying to find out the absolute truth about the central questions that human beings face, and that was the whole point of his method of Cartesian doubt. Descartes said that it doesn't matter who he was in particular, but his perspective didn't matter, but he was going to find a way to prove certain absolute truths that no one could ever disagree with again. One of the things he ended up claiming was an objective truth was that God exists. Descartes said that he came to that through an absolutely indisputable method of verification, and he came up with arguments which he said are completely logically foolproof and 100% prove that God's existence is true. For Nietzsche, what Descartes' done there is take his own pre-existing prejudice, his own religious belief, which he's had from an early point in his life, from his childhood, undoubtedly, and come up with a way of kidding himself into believing that you can prove that this stuff is objectively true, when in fact it's just a prejudice, that God's existence is just a matter of faith or prejudice for Nietzsche. Another example that Nietzsche talks about, a writer that actually he's quite fond of and quite likes, from ancient Greece, is Epicurus. Epicurus certainly saw himself as a philosopher and was trying to write about objective truths. At one point in the text we're studying, Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche talks about how Epicurus, he speculates on what really was going on when Epicurus wrote books. Now, as I said, Epicurus would have seen himself as a philosopher trying to establish objective truths. For Nietzsche, he suggests things like, well, maybe he was just writing all these books because he was jealous or envious of Plato, his teacher, and he wanted to show that he could be as significant as a philosopher as Plato could be. So that, in other words, he was motivated by his passions, by his emotions, by his particular perspective and his prejudices, rather than he was just coldly, rationally, objectively seeking the truth. Okay, so to sum this up, Nietzsche's view is that no philosopher can ever get beyond his own personal perspective and his emotions, and no one can ever deliver or discover for us pure, objective truths. And that's it for now.